So, hi everyone, I'm Benna, and this is my first webinar. So it's definitely bear with me while I talk to a telephone screen and navigate my way through giving a workshop or a presentation without actually seeing any of the people that I'm speaking to. So as we can see, I wanted to come outside today and talk about some of the edible and medicinal aspects of plants that you can find readily in the forests here in Nova Scotia. If we have time, I might run out to the boundaries of the forest, but I think I'll primarily focus on some of the plants that we can find in the forest here for now, since we are talking to foresters or people who are interested in forest forestry. And one of the things I love about herbal medicine and looking at these aspects of plants is that it helps us to see the forest and nature in a different way. It helps us to connect to nature in a different way, a really deeply tangible way, because we, as human beings, have been evolving alongside plants for our entire existence, and we completely and utterly depend on plants. A lot of our, well, all of our food comes from plants, obviously, besides animal meat, but that once came from plants as well. And a lot of our medicines once did, and even our current medicines are based off of constituents that came from plants originally. Obviously, as a herbal practitioner, I still use plants as medicine often, and especially in chronic diseases and at home, sort of like household concerns. They're amazing. So I love what I do, and I hope that you get to learn something new from some of the plants that I talk about today. So I'll get right to it. The first plant we're going to talk about is pine. And actually, I didn't check on this beforehand, but I'm pretty sure it's white pine. So we'll walk over to that. It's a little bit windy in this spot, but hopefully everything will go okay. So here we have a very small, young white pine. Do you want me to take the camera, or is that okay? Okay. So there's a bit of sun and sun glare. One of the ways you can tell white pine from other pines, well, first off, we have pine here simply because it's got these long, thin needles, and they are arranged around the branch or the twig there. So in terms of white pine, there's these little clusters of needles, and for white pine, they tend to grow in groups of 5. So if I pull that off, you can see that there's 5, maybe. I'll move it in the sunlight. There we go. So white pine, something that you may not have considered as a medicine or food, but it's actually interesting because a lot of the evergreen trees have these similar values. They're really, really high in vitamin C. So in the winter, we still have access to this medicine or vitamin C source. They're also really high in aromatic oils. So obviously that smell, the smell of evergreens, the smell of pine trees and balsam fir, and those aromatic oils, those essential oils, are antimicrobial, and in some situations, like in the white pine, have some antiviral capacity as well. So what I really like to do with white pine is, well, first off, you can use the needles, which I'm going to nibble on in a minute. You can also use the cambium layer, so just not the outer bark that we see, but just underneath the outer bark. It's called the cambium layer, and that's the living layer of the tree. That's where all of the vital energy and source and nutrients and water is. And that's also where the medicinal capacity is as well. So I generally don't suggest that people cut into trees unless absolutely necessary, but it is a sort of side note. You can actually, if you're in a desperate situation and you really need vitamin C and you need a source of food and you're lost in the wilderness, You can actually scrape off the outer bark of the pine tree and cut out a chunk of the cambium layer, so just the layer just underneath the outer bark, and cook it up and mash it up and actually eat it. I've tried this, and it's definitely tough chewing, very fibrous, and just tried it for fun. I wouldn't want to have to try it for survival, really. It's quite hard work. But if you do ever find yourself wanting to harvest barks, always take a small vertical strip. Never take a horizontal strip, especially all the way around the tree, because that, I'm sure many of you know, is called girdling the tree. That essentially cuts off all of the water and nutrients from going up the tree to the top. So if you ever do find yourself harvesting bark, only do vertical strips and make them as small as possible. In fact, I would often harvest from branches before harvesting from the actual trunk of a tree. And even better, harvest from branches that have most recently fallen to the ground after a storm. If you had a storm the night before, you can go out the day after and harvest bark. So that applies to all medicinal barks. But anyway, getting back to the needles. So I have these needles here. When a pine tree is growing, the prime time to harvest needles would actually be about a month ago, I guess, when it has the new fresh green growth on the tips. So those fresh green tips or needles are the best medicine, but it still has medicinal properties throughout the year. So even if it is the winter, you can harvest the needles and make a tea out of it. So just break them up and put them in a little strainer like you would use loose tea in. Pour boiling water over it and let it steam. But when you're steeping it, cover that cup with a lid of some sort, a plate or something else. So you're keeping those essential oils, those aromatic compounds in the hot water. Those are the really medicinal components. If you let it steep with the lid off, that means that all those aromatic, volatile smells, aromas will make your house smell really good, but they're gone off into the atmosphere. So if you're trying to consume those for a cough or, just like chesty complaints, concerns, then you want to keep those aromatic compounds in the water. So you can make a tea out of it. You could also do like a steam. So in this situation, you're using those very volatile compounds to clear out your sinuses and your lungs. So if somebody had a respiratory illness or some like a sinus congestion, you can pick some pine needles, or I've got bugs crawling all over me here. You can pick some pine needles or balsam fir needles as well. Also spruce needles. Crush them up again, put them in a bowl of water or bowl and pour boiling water over top. And then just put a towel over your head and lean your head over top and breathe those aromatic oils in. So they're not only antiviral and antibacterial, but those essential oils help to move mucus. So it's called an expectorant. Basically, it just makes you cough. So if you have a cold or flu or sinus congestion, it's going to make that mucus move a little bit. So I think those are the main things. There have been times where I've used them in a bath. They also can be these evergreen trees, I should say. So fir, pine, spruce, those needles, you can make a really strong tea in a teapot and then pour that into your bathtub. And that helps also clear congestion. If you have a flu and you've got an achy body, it can also help with achy joints and muscles and that sort of thing. So really, really great medicine for the winter time. Okay, so I guess that's good for pine. So you can tell that that's you know, just your average pine, but there's actually a lot to it that now you might look at pine a little bit differently. So, wait, I gotta get my bottle here. We're gonna move on now to the next plant, which is right here. And I don't know if you've lost sight of me here. I'm gonna hand it over, have the phone handed over. And we're gonna move into up close to wintergreen. There's quite a bit of it here. So there's a piece that doesn't look too healthy, but there's one there. So wintergreen is really common in Nova Scotia woodlands. There are a few other plants that look a little bit like it. So for example, right next to it, another plant here down below that also has ovate leaves. And this one here. And there's another one up here that looks kind of similar. But as you can see, these ones have serrated edges, whereas wintergreen, this one here, does not. Also, wintergreen has leathery leaves. So they're kind of thick. I don't know if you can really tell that, but if you got your hands on them, you could feel that they're a little bit more robust and thick than other low plants. They're also a bit shiny. I don't know if you can really see that, but yeah, there's a bit of gloss. Whereas these ones, for example, have no gloss. It's actually a little bit fuzzy. The other thing, I was hoping to find some, but I don't see any out here. Wintergreen has red berries. So these red berries just hang down underneath the leaves. They're usually quite small, but sometimes I've actually seen some significant size red berries. There are other red berries that look like wintergreen, but obviously if you follow it back to the plant and look for that leathery leaf, dark green color and shiny leaves, then you might know that it's wintergreen. So once you feel safe enough to touch it as well, you can pick a leaf and crumple it up. I'll take that one because it's already a bit diseased. And obviously there's no smell-o-vision, but if there was smell-o-vision, you take a smell and you can smell the wintergreen. So if you can smell wintergreen on that crushed up leaf, then you know for sure that you have wintergreen. Now, wintergreen is an incredible essential oil. It's really useful for sore muscles. It's actually often used in pain creams, muscle creams, including, I've seen it in some products on shelves in the drugstores, as well as many herbal products for pain creams. There's some more there. This one actually has, well, it's been nibbled, so it's a bit wrinkly on the edge, but it's just from a bug. But you can see it kind of grows low to the ground. So if you wanted to use wintergreen, the way you would use it is by putting it in oil. So, I mean, that process in itself has some nuances, but you could just take the leaves, crumple them up in your hands, and submerge them in an oil of your choice. So olive oil or avocado oil, almond oil, anything you can think of, and leave that in a semi-warm place for 2 weeks to a month, and then strain it off. And then you have a bit of wintergreen oil and that you can use on sore muscles. The other thing is that wintergreen has really tasty berries. Those berries are very tasty. So you can eat a couple of those if you want to. The only thing is that wintergreen has some salicylates that can be irritating to the kidneys. So it's best not to consume too much. You can actually drink a tea of wintergreen if you want to. Sometimes I add a leaf or two, but I just tend not to use it too much internally, simply because it can be a bit hard on the kidneys. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back. It's interesting not having people ask questions, but I guess I'll get to your questions at the end. So take note if you do have any questions for me here. We're gonna move on to another plant. Just over here. See, I want to find a really good example. Which is down here. Okay. So this plant here, some of you may know. I'm going to get really close. Oh, unfortunately. Oh, yes. Okay. That one's been a bit bitten. But this is false lily of the valley. It's really important to make sure that you do not have true lily of the valley. False lily of the valley flowers in late May, depending on the year, I guess, and the location in the province, but somewhere in May, late May, beginning of June. It has these sweet little towers of white flowers that are quite small and short compared to true lily of the valley. True lily of the valley has much longer lanceolate leaves, and their flower spike is much taller, and it has these white bells on it. So if you are, and it smells amazing, but it's best not to, well, you can pick it, some people pick it and bring it home to smell in their jars, and it does have medicinal value, but it's also highly toxic and only to be used by professionals. But this one, on the other hand, is totally safe, and its leaves are edible in the spring in a salad. I'm going to let you look really closely at that leaf. It has a little bit of a heart shape at the bottom. And the size of it compared to my thumb. So it's the leaves in a little bit of an addition to salad in the spring. You could use them at any time of the year, but they just get a little tougher as they get older and their taste profile changes. And then my favorite part is the berries. Actually have a better example, although this is pretty good. So you can see right now the berries, some of them have fallen off or they haven't ripened. But the two that are there are still green right now. There we go. With some red speckles. So those red speckles, basically the whole berry will turn like a ruby red, a wine red color. And it's like a little red jewel. It is not opaque, whereas true lily of the valley has opaque berries. So these ripen in the fall. Trying to zoom in on that. Or late summer, early fall. And they hang on quite late through the season. So sometimes I've found them right in the middle of winter and picked them and eaten them at that time. And that's a really nice treat if you can find them at that point. I'm going to show you another one that's really good. I think I found one that has, yeah. No, it's in the shade. No, it's not. There we go. This one has quite a few berries on it. And they're so tasty. I remember the first time I ate one. They're very small, but they do taste like cherry and wine mixed together. It's a very strong, fruity taste. So that's a nice treat in the fall, basically, to eat. Okay. So I'm going to move on to my next plant, which is wild sarsaparilla. I love this plant. It was one of the first medicinal forest plants that I learned about, actually. And you can see it growing in patches in the understory here amongst this old trailer. So one of its identifying characteristics, it can vary in size quite significantly. So that's not, like this is pretty average for the size of a sarsaparilla. You can see, but it can get quite tall and big, or it can be shorter and smaller than that. See, these ones here are smaller than this one here. So it has this one central stalk and then 3 leaves that come off of that. And each one of those has typically about 5, but it can have more or it can have less leaflets. Each one of these leaves is leaflets. Sometimes people will mistake this for poison ivy. So I will, because they might just see these 3 leaves here and be like, oh, leaves of 3, let it be. But especially the smaller ones, like this one. One of the distinguishing differences is that sarsaparilla has these toothed margins. Oh, yeah. Serrated edges. Never mind my dirty finger there, digging in the soil. So it has these serrated edges to it, whereas poison ivy has a much smoother edge generally. Sometimes it has one notch on the margin, but it doesn't have this many it doesn't have a tooth margin like that, or serrated margin. Also, there's this characteristic, central stalk, 3 coming off of that, 3 leaves coming off of that, and each of those have 5 to 7 leaflets. The other thing that I always say to look, there's another plant that looks very much like this, but there's no example of it. So what I will say is that one of sarsaparillas identifying characteristics as well, if you don't have a flower or berries, is that down at the bottom of the stem is, so the medicinal part of this plant is the rhizome, which is a modified stem that crawls along under the ground, and other stems are coming up from it. So you can usually you can sort of see where that rhizome is starting, and it's joining to the stem pretty easily without doing much digging. See if I can. I want a really good example. But if you just move the soil a little bit, usually you can see that rhizome starting, and it has, these are obviously not too old because quite often it'll put on another layer of notches per year. I've come across some sarsaparilla that has this knobbly, notched or ridged rhizome connection spot. It's quite long. These seem to be fairly young. So, wild sarsaparilla, once again. The rhizome is the edible and medicinal part. So I'm just going to show you the rhizome bit. It's very easy. In terms of root medicine, or quote-unquote root medicine, it's one of the easiest things to harvest because it's very close to the surface, and one of the it's much easier to dig. But one thing is that I always use as much leave no trace as possible. So once I'm finished digging up some of the rhizome that I'm going to use, I usually cover it in. The other thing is that I won't take from a patch that's sparse, and I never take more than 10% of the patch of any medicinal plant. But so you can pull up this rhizome relatively easily, and I really should have done this beforehand maybe, but here I am saying it's really easy. You can just kind of follow it along from the stem. And you can see how I'm exposing that rhizome really easily. So I can just quickly snap that off. And I should have brought my knife with me. So this plant is still going to survive. This plant is probably all of these stems that are coming up are actually probably one plant, just reproducing through rhizomes. So here I have a piece of the rhizome. And there's a little baby one that actually doesn't look very happy anyway, attached to it, that's come up from the rhizome. And I'm going to talk about it while Mom films me for a minute here. Okay, so I'm back. So what you would do with this rhizome is there's like a outer bark here you can see. It kind of flakes off pretty easily. And I've gotten to that inner layer. Oops, sorry, I'm moving too fast. And I'm going to chew on it. Wow. It always amazes me, the taste of sarsaparilla. I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. It's very aromatic. Yeah, so this isn't necessarily the sarsaparilla that was used to flavor root beer. That's a different species entirely. But it has similar taste and aromatic profiles, so it could be used as a substitute. It's spicy, it's sweet, it's bitter, it smells earthy, but it's much more pungent and spicy and aromatic than you would expect a root, or I guess this is technically a modified stem, something that you dug out from underneath the earth to taste. It's really quite surprising. So the sarsaparilla root is, you can use it in cooking, or you could use it in a root beer recipe, like I mentioned, or something else of that sort. The other thing you can use it for is, in terms of medicinal action, it's known for clearing out and moving fluids in the body. So it's a little bit of a diuretic. It helps you urinate a little bit more. It helps move lymph and move like wet, stagnant states. So it could be useful in the spring when if you're feeling really bogged down and stagnant because you've been sitting around all winter and eating a bunch of food, because that's what I tend to do. It's warming, it's moving, and it's stimulating. It can help with that aromatic sort of warm flavor. It can really help digestion a little bit to get that moving. You don't need a lot of it. Even just the taste is making that happen for me right now. It's said to bring light to all the dark spaces. So moving out the sludge, bringing light to some of the deeper dark spaces, I guess, helping things move and flow. And in terms of energetics, I guess that could be if you're having a hard time with a certain depressive state and you're feeling really stuck. There's also questions on whether it is an adaptogen. And this is because it's in the Aurelia, or it's in the same family as Russian Siberian ginseng, so Eleutherococcus. They share the same family. They're very similar in looks, actually. If you do get a chance to looking around to see if there are any, see any of the flowers or the berries of sarsaparilla, they grow up in a globe, the flowers almost look like a allium species, like an onion species. So it's a globe of white flowers, just a straight stalk underneath the leaves. And then as the fruit ripens and the berries change, they are blue. They're a blue color. It's a blue, deep blue globe. So one thing I will say is not to be mistaken with blue bead lily, which is also in the forest here. Over here, let's have a quick little walk over. I'm tethered here. Here we have blue bead lily. So these also have trees. They also have medicinal value, but I don't think I'm going to highlight those today. The main difference is between sarsaparilla berries, so there's some sarsaparilla right next to it, and the blue bead lily is that the sarsaparilla has a full globe, round globe, or orb of berries, whereas the blue bead lily has these sparse 3 to 4. Okay, so I guess I have 5 minutes left. I'm going to pass this over. Actually, I'm just going to walk over to the last plant we'll highlight, which is just in here. So here we have, crawling along the ground, another fairly common species in woodland in Nova Scotia, and this is Partridge Berry. Some people call it snake eyes, some people call it twin flower. Its Latin name is Michella repens. I just realized I wasn't telling you any of the other Latin names, so ask me in the questions if you're interested. So this partridge berry, or twin flower, is a vine that grows over the forest floor. It's quite often found in shaded canopies and around mossy areas. As you can see, it's really quite prevalent here. And see with my face, it's viney and it just crawls along the ground. One of the defining characteristics here compared to other vines that have similar opposite leaves is that it has this dominant white vein that goes down the middle. It's also a little bit glossy. And it has smooth margins, so the edges are smooth on the leaves. This plant also has little red berries that are edible. I really, really wish there were some here, but I cannot see any. They just don't taste like much, so you could eat them if you wanted to, but they're not the most appetizing, I guess, because they're just a bit mealy and bland. The plant flowers, and it flowers in, the reason it's called twin flower is because it has 2 flowers that come out of the same source on the stem. And then those 2 flowers come together to make one berry. So if you find a berry, a red berry, that's in amongst this partridge berry looking vine, and you're wondering if it belongs to, oh, look, there is one. It's just very undeveloped. It's new. Oh no, I wonder if we can focus on it. So basically you can kind of just barely see. There's 2 eyes on it, so that's why it's called snake eyes. When it's bigger, it's red. And it has, basically, that's where the 2 flowers were. So those 2 flowers came together to form one ovary or one fruit. And there's remnants of where those 2 flowers were on the berry. So that's a key identifying factor. So partridge berry is used for fertility. Basically, it helps tone the uterus. It can be really, really useful. for women who are having a hard time conceiving and maintaining a pregnancy. It's useful before and up to pregnancy, but then you should stop taking it once they're pregnant because it continues to tone the uterus, and you don't really want too much toning or tension on the uterus during pregnancy, especially the first trimester. But it's also really useful about 2 weeks before giving birth to help prepare for the birth, basically, the birthing process. The other thing it's useful for is menses, like women who struggle with cramping and maybe heavy bleeding. It can be used as a tea consistently, tonically, so drinking tea throughout the month to ease on menstrual concerns. I've heard tell that it's also helpful for men in fertility, but I haven't had any firsthand experience of that. So it's a really helpful, amazing plant for menstrual and uterine concerns and fertility. So I think that's right on the dot. I'm going to turn my camera around so that it's facing me and take your questions. Hi. Okay, right. I hope that gave a little bit of inspiration, and it wasn't too much information. And if you'd like to know more, I do hold plant walks and I do workshops. I haven't been doing any this summer so far, mainly due to COVID, but I really would like to do a small group workshops and walks coming up the end of August and beginning of September. I also bought a property and just moved here at the beginning of this month, so it's been a bit busy, and this is the place. It's pretty amazing. Yes, so thank you for being here. I'm happy to hear what questions you have for me. Take it away, Hiba.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting and so great. It worked out so well.
Yay!
So we have lots of questions. First one, how edible are the Ariella berries? Can you eat them in quantity?
Sorry, which ones?
Arlia, Aralia.
Oh, Aurelia. So
Aurelia, there it is.
The sarsaparilla. Oh, that's actually a good question. I don't actually know if they're edible. So I don't know the answer to that question. You stumped me. I haven't really considered the other parts of the plant, but I'm sure. No, I'm not sure of anything. I don't actually know their answer. But I'm going to go look it up because now I'm really curious. I've been so focused on the rhizome. Sorry.
Thank you. So we have another question about the partridge berry, and it's asking how to consume it.
Partridge berry?
Yep.
You can consume it any way you want to. I will say that it's not the same partridge berry as partridge berry in Newfoundland. Certainly doesn't have very much taste. It's just pithy and white on the inside, and it has quite a big pit. So I haven't actually bothered to make anything out of partridge berry because it wouldn't add a lot of flavor to a dish or anything, but I have snacked on it when I've been out in the forest, just eating it raw from the plant. But really, I mean, maybe some people do put it in jams and berries, but it's not juicy, it's quite dry, and it's pretty flavorless. So in terms of edibility, technically it's edible, but it's just not very palatable, I guess. It's kind of like a serious emergency fund berry. So if you want to just have something to eat or snack on, then you could eat that. Something like wintergreen berry has much more flavor. It's still pithy, but it has the wintergreen flavor to it.
Okay, great, thanks. So speaking of wintergreen leaves, how many wintergreen leaves does one need per unit of oil?
Oh my goodness, that's a very, sorry. I got confused about the essential oil there. I was going to say a lot. But no, if you're putting it in an oil, like a fixed oil, like a coconut oil or a almond oil, all you need to do there is quite often oils like that are just made by the folk method. So the folk method meaning that you put your plant matter into the jar and cover it with the oil, like break up the plant matter as much as you can. You could even, I was going to say you could blend it, but the more you break it up, the more difficult it is to completely strain out. So keep that in mind. So tear it up a little bit, put it in the jar, then top up with your oil so that the oil is covering the plant matter by about half an inch to an inch, and then check it in 24 hours. I don't think that wintergreen doesn't really absorb a lot of liquid, but it's good to check it after 24 hours just to see if some of that oil has been absorbed into the plant matter. This applies to any time you're making like an infused oil. And top it up again if it has been sucked into the plant material so that it's covering that plant material by half an inch to an inch. One more thing I will say about that oil is I would recommend that you use fresh wintergreen material because those essential oils are still vital and that's what we're looking for. But whenever you use fresh plant material, you got to be aware that there's going to be some water in there as well. And water and oil don't mix. So one way to help, it's like a fine balance between retaining those essential oils but evaporating the water too. So I would usually like put that in maybe put it well, I don't know. Right now, my house is warm, so it's just warm. But you could put it in a window sill with a paper bag over it so that the sun's not directly getting onto the oil, but it's warming it up. And then don't put a lid on the oil, but put cheesecloth over the top so that some of that water can evaporate, the water that's already existing in the plant. And when you're working with essential oils, it's difficult because you want to also retain those aromatic oils. The other option is that you let it steep, and then when it's finished steeping, let it like strain the plant matter out, in this case wintergreen, and let that oil sit for 24 hours. And if there's any water left in the oil, it'll separate. The oil will be on the top and the water will be on the bottom, and then you can decant the oil off. Because if you keep any of that water in there, it doesn't mean that it's ruined. It just means that it'll go rancid much more quickly than if you make sure that your oil is kept separate from any water content. So that was a beyond explanation, but simply put whatever plant material you want in your jar, cover it with oil to about a half an inch to an inch over the plant material, check within 24 hours and top it up. It's good.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. We have one last question. So where can people find you? So for guided walks and everything, so what's your contact information? So I can send that out with the thank you email, but just like kind of generally, where would people be able to kind of find more information on the guided walks?
I think the best thing, I've been a bit quiet this year. I'd say check my website out because I usually, like if I'm doing anything, any walks or workshops, I will post that in my workshops and events section on my website, so ramblewoodherbals.com. The other thing, like one of the best ways to get information from me is actually to sign up to my email, like newsletter. I really haven't been sending out a whole lot, but I do send out updates when I'm more active, and when I will be doing workshops and walks, I always send out an email to my list. So yeah, they don't get a lot from that, so don't worry about being bombarded. But yes, I think signing up to my email, and the way to do that, I haven't set up any sort of input on my website yet. Obviously, I'm not very tech savvy, but you'll have my information. You can just email me at ramblewoodherbals@gmail.com, and just ask to be added to my list, and I'll put you on the list, and then you'll get all the information and updates.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll send that out as well afterwards, like tomorrow when I send out the recording. We have a couple more questions that came up. So about sweet fern, one person is asking what can they do with it?
Sweet fern, yeah. I'm wondering if we even have some sweet fern here. Anyway, we don't need to. Did you? So yeah, sweet fern is obviously very aromatic. Oh, it's right in front of me. Wow. Let's just turn it over real quick. I'll do a really quick review. Aromatic, it's you can smell that aromatic quality. So anytime you smell those essential oils, they're going to be really useful for there's going to be antibacterial properties. Sweet fern is also quite useful for sore joints. You can rub it on sore joints, sore muscles, similar to wintergreen. I've heard that you can burn it or use it topically to ward off flies and mosquitoes. I've tried that. I don't find it works all that well. But it's worth, like, it doesn't last long. It's also a slight diuretic, so it stimulates the kidneys a little bit. And there's something else. Stomach, like it's useful for stimulating the digestive system, because if you for you when you're next out to take a little piece off and off the plant and give it a little nibble. This is never taste a plant unless you are 100% sure of what it is. But once you do know what that is, and if you do know that it is not toxic, one of the best ways to get to know a plant is to nibble it and think about what you're tasting. So with the sweet fern and what you're smelling. So with the sweet fern, it's quite aromatic. It's got those essential oil compounds. It's also bitter and astringent. So really good for irritated digestive systems, calming inflammation in the digestive system there, and kind of activating it. Yeah, now I'm all. It's tasty. So sweet fern tea is also really nice for warming up and moving digestion in the winter. You can dry it out. It's a really nice tea. Yeah. I'm sure there's other things, but those are the main things that come to mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So another question we have is kind of fun. What is the tastiest plant or berry in the forest?
I like that one. Here, I would say, I mean, I love blueberries. Wild blueberries are my favorite. But also the one that I was showing, the wild lily of the valley, is my second favorite, is also a favorite. I love it. It's not very common. It's kind of like when you're trying to find wild strawberries. They're so tasty, but you get like this little taste burst and then it's over. But it's so tasty. I really like it. It also stains your skin and your clothes though, so be careful. So I think false lily of the valley, not wild lily of the valley, false lily of the valley berries. And I want to be very clear about that. Yeah, I think that's my choice.
Perfect. So we did have a question about the Latin name for sweet fern, but I think that was answered. But I think, would you be able to show sweet fern right now if you can?
Yes. Yep.
It's kind of like an additional plant on how to ID it for people who don't know how to.
Yes, thank you, Gabriel. I'm seeing some things pop up here. Comptonia. So here we have sweet fern. Um, somewhat. Oh yeah, yeah. So we have this quite woody stem. It we have actual ferns here. We've got some bracken, and bracken comes back every year, or it grows new every year. Sweet fern is not actually fern. But we have a woody stem. The leaves grow every year. It's perennial. And these are very distinct leaves. They're scalloped edges. And it tends to grow almost like a shrub. This is just one small piece here, but it can get, where's my hand? There it is. It can get quite tall and bushy, and it tends to grow in clusters. Oh yeah, there's a lot of individual plants here. So here we have some more. And there doesn't seem to be any flowers or nuts on this yet. But they kind of look like little, oh, that's not, oh yeah, it's two things right next to each other. So right here we have, I think this is bracken fern, yeah. Bracken fern right next to the sweet fern. And if you smell it, one of the other key identifying items of sweet fern is you take a leaf and rub it between your fingers and smell it. It's really spicy and aromatic smelling, if you're still not quite sure. If it doesn't have that spicy, aromatic, slightly sweet smell to it, then it's probably not sweet fern.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have another question.
Okay.
So, do you use Labrador tea?
I do. I haven't for a long time. It's interesting because I haven't really lived in an area that I've found a lot in. But yes, you can use it as a tea. You can smoke it. I haven't actually smoked it, but it does tend to have some slightly not really full mind altering aspects to it, but it does a little bit. I'm drawing a major blank. I haven't actually used Labrador tea that much because it hasn't really been readily available to me. Yeah. I'm trying to think if it's good for lung issues and kidney issues, but I don't know the details. I'm blanking on it. I'm on the spot. Yeah.
So many plants to keep note of.
Well, yeah, that too.
We
It's
have
interesting.
another.
Like a lot of the plants I'm really are the weeds and the weedy plants. Yeah.
But that's good though. I mean, a lot of these are very commonly available. Like all of the ones that
Hmm.
you discussed, you can find those like on any hike, really, just out
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah.
We have another question. So,
Yep.
can tinctures develop mold if the plant matter comes in contact with air while it's developing? How do you know?
Ah. Hmm. Yeah, so tinctures don't tend to develop mold, um, but it needs to be, if you're making a tincture, you need to make sure that your alcohol strength is at least 25%. So if it's less than 25% in strength, um, it does have the potential to go off or go moldy. It's best to have, like if you're making a tincture at home on your own, it's best to have that plant matter covered as much as possible. Um, I don't know if the person who asked this question has been using like a ratio method, because sometimes when you use a ratio method, it's hard to cover all of the plant matter. If you do have some plant matter that's close to the top or it's not fully covered by the alcohol, then I would suggest like flipping it or shaking it every day so that any plant matter that is exposed to air has a shorter amount of time that it's exposed to air. But if your alcohol strength is actually 25% or more, then it's unlikely that it'll develop mold if you're making sure that the plant material isn't too exposed to air. I mean, I've made so many tinctures over the last 10 years, and there have been times where I've had plant material that sat in macerating. So, in other words, just steeping in the alcohol for like a year and a half because I've been too busy and it's just kind of gone to the back of the pile, and it's been absolutely fine. Um, I think that if it does develop mold, you will be able, I've never actually had that happen to myself, is what I'm saying. And I've made tinctures from fresh plant material and dry plant material. And, but if it did happen to develop mold, like if your alcohol strength is less than 25%, then you would probably see mold and you would smell it. Like I'm sure that you would smell that musty, moldy smell. If it's just gone off colored, that isn't necessarily meaning that it's gone off. It's just that the plant material quite often oxidizes, and if it's exposed to some air, and that can be okay. It's just, yeah, try to flip it and shake it as often as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think that's it for questions. Thank you for presenting. It's a really lovely presentation.
Thank you. I'm glad it worked.
Right? Oh my God. It was great. Thanks for everyone for joining in. Really great questions as always. So we have 3 webinars that we just put out like last week. So next week is in the Forestry Professional Series. That's on non-timber forest products. Also be discussing non-timber forest products in the context of Mi'kmaq culture and traditions. So that'll be really interesting. Second week is on climate forestry, so carbon forests. And then the third one is the one that was canceled in July, if anyone remembers that, and that's on multi-value forest management. So those are the 3 we have up next. If you'd like to register, just go through the website and or email me, whichever one you prefer. But other than that, yeah, thank you again for coming in and presenting, Benna. It's really great. And I hope everyone has a lovely day.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming and watching. It was fun. Take care.